Calm, focus, happiness.
Hey, Mindful Tribe, welcome to the show. Today, we're going to be talking with an internationally recognized keynote speaker and author of 16 books that have been translated into 10 languages. And I haven't read all of his books, but the book that we are going to be talking about is called Grace Under Pressure, Leading Through Change and Crisis. And I got to tell you, this book really is excellent. And I'm so excited to have John Baldoni with us today. John, are you in mindfulness mode today?
I'm in a mindfulness mode, Bruce. Absolutely. So
that's good. I'm glad. So what does mindfulness mean to you?
Well, mindfulness simply means stop and smell the roses. Be aware of what's going on, being in the moment. But I put a little bit of a twist on it, if you'll allow me, Bruce. I have written about it before, and from a leadership perspective, yes, you need to know yourself, be self-aware, what's going on around you. But from a leadership perspective, you have to be kind of poke your head over the parapet to see what's happening coming at us or around us, but also be processing this kind of situational report, what's going on. So I'm breaking the mold a little bit of mindfulness, but I'll call it leadership mindfulness. So.
Right. And you've been working in that area of leadership for quite some time, haven't you? When did you first start working in that area?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because, and I like to say this, Bruce, leadership as we know it today is really something of a fad. Of course, leadership has been with us time immemorial, forever. Mm-hmm. But the idea of leadership in the corporate or organizational structure is actually something, well, within the last 40 years or so. And so I was introduced to, first of all, I was introduced to the concepts of leadership through my education. I was educated by the Jesuits. And then, of course, the good example that my parents set me. But I think I became aware of it, and this is where it gets into the fad. I used to be a corporate speechwriter. And so speakers would ask me to write about leadership. And I began to study it, and I would write about it. And then I eventually went back to school. So I don't know, say 30 years or so, maybe a little bit longer, I've been exploring this topic. So.
Right. Well, that's an important topic to explore. I think that a lot of people are a little bit confused about what leadership means. Do you agree with that?
I think it's a good question, Bruce. I want to say people know it and when they sense it. And I think I came across a statistic, there's something like 55,000 definitions of leadership, and I probably have contributed a few myself. You know, it's the idea of getting people to move from one place to another. That place could be physical, it could be metaphorical. I like to say leadership is about getting things done the right way, not an original concept, but leaders do what needs to be done. They step up and set the path. Sometimes they're doers, other times they're, quote, supervisors, but they're always engaged. I think most importantly, what leaders do is create conditions for people to do their work, do it well, and excel. I think there's something more to leader, and that's about finding common cause. What is it that brings us together? And that's really what led me to the concept of grace. And thank you for mentioning Grace Under Pressure, Leading Through Change and Crisis. It's my third book on the topic of grace. Grace to me is that sense of connectedness. Grace is the catalyst for the greater good. And so what leaders channel that to bring people together. We all want to be part of something larger than ourselves, as you well know, Bruce. And so that's where the leadership quotient comes from. And leadership is, I know you have written about and spoken, as leadership is rooted in purpose. And purpose becomes, as Simon Sinek and many others have said, purpose is our why. But from it, we get our vision, which is our becoming or aspiring, our mission, which is our doing, building, and then I think most importantly, our value system, which is our sense of belonging. And what is belonging? Belonging is community. And here in the States, and I hope not in Canada, but I suspect it's the same, there's this terrible epidemic of loneliness. And what we
Yes.
need to do is cultivate community. I think grace can be that connector. I think grace can find ways to create bonds amongst us. So that is why the topic intrigues me. So.
What do you think is the biggest change in leadership over the last 3 or 4 years since we've had some of these challenges with our economy and with COVID and so on?
Right. I think we've seen a quote humanization, if I will, of the concept of leadership. I think humility has come to the fore. I've had the opportunity to interview Julia Burstein, who has a wonderful book called When Women Lead. And she said in her research, at least during the time of the lockout, senior women leaders did better than male leaders. Why? Because they weren't afraid to ask for help. Whereas, we men, we don't even want to ask for directions.
No, especially that.
Right. So I think that's it. The sense of humility, knowing that I don't have all the answers. And certainly when it came to COVID, none of us had the answers, but we coped. But COVID taught us a great lesson in resilience. And I used to do, when I started getting back on the speaker circuit, I would have people stand up and give themselves a round of applause. Why? Because they survived. And better than surviving, they invariably thrive. They figured it out. We came together. We worked things out, not as expected, but I think we're stronger for it. We still have incredible problems in front of us, but I think leaders are more resilient. And I think I want to say the best leaders are much more aware of their people and willing to commit to higher levels of success for them.
Right. John, which feeds you more? Is it speaking in front of people or is it writing?
Well, there's a third thing I do, and it's coaching. I think I take the greatest satisfaction from coaching. Why is that, Bruce? Because I have the opportunity to work one-on-one with some great people. I belong to a wonderful organization called 100 Coaches, which was founded by Marshall Goldsmith, who is the founder of really executive coaching as we know it today. And so that's the great opportunity to do that with people who want to make a positive difference in their workplace. And that's always exciting. From an ego standpoint, I love being on stage, of course. But but you raise a good question, because I'm a writer at heart. I used to be a corporate speech writer before that. So writing to me is second nature. That doesn't mean it's any easier, but it's what I do. So I need all three, if you will.
And John, have you embraced AI as part of your writing?
Well, that's boy, how dare you say that,
I know.
Bruce?
I asked the tough questions,
That's funny. The answer is no and yes. As I'm a contributor to Forbes.com, and we were issued an edict, with which I totally agree, not to use Chat GPT in writing our columns, which is good for me because I think Chat GPT could do a better job. Now, that said, I have colleagues who use Chat GPT for brainstorming, designing workshops. And if you set the right parameters, so for example, on a lark, I said, write a 500-word term paper on John Baldoni's view on grace. Those were, and it came out okay. It might have been a grade B paper for a university course. And it was my ideas. Now, if I did a contrast to another author, a theologian on that same topic, then where do the citations come in? But I think now ChatGPT does that. But I think a good friend of mine uses it to brainstorm, and so that's fine. But the thing is AI is going to change things, Bruce. And I told you about our group 100 coaches, and we are all wrestling with that issue and where it's going. And I think what's very important for all of us to understand, whatever you think about it, you got to get involved, because we know the dark side will be there. So let people of good intention exert their will so we can use it for the best purposes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, in your coaching, you probably have lots of stories that you could share with us. Do you have a story that you can share with about a client where you were able to really help them to transition to a much better place, into a successful place?
Well, it's a fair question, and I think really the honest answer is no, and again, no, and yes. And why do I say no? It's because a coach is a guide. A coach is pointing out things that a leader could, or an executive could do better, and it's up to he or she to implement that. So in other words, like a sports analogy, we don't play the game. Okay, it's the person, it's the executive who's doing it. So I've had the opportunity of working with executives who've been promoted to the very highest ranks, including CEO. I've also worked with people and enabled them basically to save their jobs just by getting them to adopt, encouraging them to do the work to adopt a different mindset, a more holistic mindset where they could be their best and be more mindful of the situation and themselves and their impact on it. So that's kind of a long-winded answer.
Well, I know that you have 2 grandchildren because you dedicated your book to these 2 individuals. I think one's name is, where did I leave? Oh yeah, Trip and Giovanni. And so what have Trip and Giovanni taught you about mindfulness?
No one's ever asked me that question, Bruce. So that's a good one. Well, I think that young children, and as parents, you may have adult children at this point, Bruce. So, and your own.
Yeah, I do. I do have a 21-year-old. Yes,
we were so involved with raising our children that it was part of us, and we didn't really think about it. Now, going back as grandparents, our children are grown. And so we see the world through their eyes. And it's interesting. Whenever I see my grandchildren, when I'm around them, what do I think of? I think of my grandparents and my perspective and my relationship to them. And I was blessed to have 4 of them living. And they showered me with much love and grace, and I try to do that. So, no, you have to be aware of what the kids are doing. And when my little one, Giovanni's just 2, and so he's into everything. So he has to be watched. Trip will be 5 shortly, so he's going to be a kindergartner, much more aware, much more expressive, very curious. They're all curious. I love kids; they're so curious.
Oh yeah.
And so children are mindful, and you know what? Children pick up the emotions of one another, but they also pick up the emotions of their parents and maybe even their grandparents too. So it's a good question. I think children are in many ways more mindful in a sense than we adults are.
Yeah,
would you
totally.
Agree?
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I know you wrote a book, I don't know, several years ago, where one of the chapters was about mindfulness. Maybe you want to share a little bit about that and the research involved and what you came up with for that chapter of your book.
Right. The topic of that book was, the title of that book was called Moxie. And I had turned Moxie, which is guts and gumption and determination focused toward a goal, at least as I describe it, into an acronym. So the M was mindfulness. And so that's where I got the idea of a leadership perspective. And one of the seminal influences on me on the topic of mindfulness is a colleague and friend of mine, Donald Altman. And Donald has written I think 18 books on the topic of mindfulness and all of its permutations. And he's taught me a lot. So I used him as my Sherpa, if I will. So that's where I came. But I think mindfulness is so critical. And I think there's themes of that in my work on grace, because grace is that connectivity, that connection, that fostering community. And if you're not mindful, Bruce, you really can't build or be part of community. I mean, you can't be a thriving member of community without that commitment. So,
yeah, I would totally agree with that. That's for sure. Do you have a story about bullying of any kind? Any story about maybe as a child, as an adult, maybe in business or in leadership, where mindfulness would have made a difference?
that's a good question. I know that's your area of expertise and you've done so well in it. So, I mean, obviously as a child, I witnessed it and things like that. I was probably a victim of it, but nothing severe that would cause any, permanent loss to me. And the fact that I can't even remember it is probably a positive. I have seen bullying in the workplace, and that's very insidious. And there's something called the bully boss, who is actually absolutely toxic. And those are people who, I mean, there are bosses who are abrasive and who, raise their voices and things like that. But a bully boss is one who, if you will, thrives on denigrating others. And so that person, and he might be sociopathic. And if the person's sociopathic, there's nothing you can do about that. You just avoid them if you can. But if it's truly that sense of mindfulness, a bully is acting with behaviors which do not have any care for others. It's all about self-reward, self-gratification, and they're distinctly unmindful. So if you could get them to adopt a different point of view, and here's, again, you can't do this with a sociopath, but you could do this with someone who appears to be a bully by riding people hard and that. And if you could pull them aside, coaching, if you will, and I've done this, saying, do you know the effect you're having on other people? And that's where mindfulness is integral to coaching, because self-awareness is essential. You can't grow and develop if you're not willing to explore yourself, but also get, recognize, hey, I'm not perfect and I can get better. I need to be mindful of what I need to do better. So yeah, I can see mindfulness plays a strong role in that.
Yeah, for sure. As we move forward, I want to ask you 5 quick answer questions. So just 30-second answers are perfect, John. The first one is this: who is one person who has been a powerful mindfulness kind of influence in your life?
Well, I'd have to say my mother, who just passed away a year and a half ago at 92. She was an exemplar of community service. She was a small town mayor. She was an ecumenicalist of all faiths. And so she was very interested in social justice and practiced that and put her energy behind that. So.
Oh, very good. Well, my condolences to you. So my second question is about emotions. So how has mindfulness helped you deal with your emotions?
It creates self-awareness. I mean, you're looking at somebody who can be a class A jerk from time to time. And so being mindful of how my quick words or snide remark might affect someone can hold me back when I remember it.
My next question is about breathing, and we haven't really talked about this. Do you have anything to say about this topic? Maybe before you speak, maybe you have a special, breathing exercise you do or something like this.
Well, interesting. In the book, as you know, I quote the work of Dr. Sharon Melnick. When she's a clinical psychologist. Her topic is resilience. And she does talk about breathing techniques and things like that, as does Donald Altman, whom I also quote. So yeah, just, breathing from the diaphragm is important when getting yourself in that mindset. But when you are speaking, do what opera singers do. And that's sing from, breathe from your diaphragm. So you're more filled that way. When I always think when we do this deep breathing thing, we are becoming more physically centered. And I like to think that we're also emotionally centered that way too, Bruce. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so too. Your book, Grace Under Pressure, I very much recommend it. Are there any other books that you would recommend on this
Well,
topic?
it's my third book on the topic of grace, and my first was called Grace: A Leader's Guide to a Better Us, and that is an exploration of grace as generosity, respect, and compassion, as well as action and energy, energizing. And my book, just previous, it's basically a book of poetry, and it's about reflections of during the lockdown of what leaders could be thinking about, should be thinking about for themselves. It's an exercise. That book might be an exercise in mindfulness, really, if you take a step back from it. Very short little poems, if you will, at least in poetic format.
Mhm.
And that was, I'm quite proud of that. And so, I'm exploring the topic of grace, and that's where I want to hang my hat right now.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's awesome. Are there any apps at all that you use or that you recommend that can help people to be a little bit more grounded and focused?
I don't use apps for that reason, so I couldn't speak knowledgeably, Bruce. So
So your answer is maybe not to use apps.
no, you know what, Bruce? What works for you is great,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's, who am I to say don't do that? I use apps on everything, so I just don't have one on mindfulness. And I
Sure.
think what it is, I mean, there are some folks who've created apps that are in the form of habit reinforcing. And
Yeah.
I think mindfulness may fall into that. And I think there's some apps related to that. One person I will recommend is Chad Lawson. Chad is a composer and pianist, and I've had the opportunity to interview him. Chad also does a podcast, which is called Calm It Down. And
Oh,
his new album is Breathe. And he talks about mental health issues, but from a holistic standpoint. And I highly recommend his work, Chad Lawson. So
I'll check him out. Yeah. It sounds like
mm,
you'd be a great guest for the show as well.
he would be great
Yeah.
guy too, and an accomplished musician too. So
Yeah.
mm.
Well, and you being such an accomplished writer and speaker and coach, I just want to ask you about your routine. Do you have a certain routine that you kind of do every day and it keeps you on track and helps you to stay focused and helps you to just achieve the kinds of things you want to achieve in life?
I, you could ask my wife about that. And yes, I am a very routinized person.
Are you?
I have been self-employed for 40 plus years, and I have the soul of a clerk. I like to work 9 to 5. Now, I don't quite do that anymore, but I get up, I exercise, that keeps me on track. I try every day to practice piano, and I do that. I like to golf, and I golf either by myself or with my friends. So, I am semi-retired now, Bruce, and so I don't live the road warrior life anymore. So I'm enjoying each day as it comes. So with music, with recreation, with family, grandkids, friends, all of that. So maybe I'm less of a routine now, but more enriched. I try every day now to read poetry. And so, because I fancy myself as an amateur poet, at least, and so I try to, and I find inspiration from that. I read lots of, I read 3 or 4 books at a time, probably because I can't concentrate longer than 3 or 4 chapters in one topic. So I kind of hop around, but that works for me. So
Right.
reading is important to me. And I try to reflect when I can. I often reflect when I'm playing music, and I have the opportunity to play piano at a local hospital in the lobby, where Bruce, I'm the headliner because I'm the only one there.
Oh,
So I'm the headliner.
that's awesome.
And then I post a piece of, your viewers might want to know, I post a piece of music every Monday on LinkedIn. I call it Motivation Monday. And sometimes it's an improvisational piece, but most often it's just, could be a little piece of country music or American standard. It could be a country western song. It could be a pop song or whatever. And I maybe tell a little story about it and then why it appeals to me. And I can't say that whatever I do is any definitive version of it, but I hope I don't wreck it.
Oh, that's cool. I was going to ask you what kind of music you played because I saw you on a video and I saw the piano there and I'm like, oh, I play the piano, and the piano is a big part of my life as well. So I'm really interested that you do that. So I'll check it out on LinkedIn for sure. And I assume I just find you on LinkedIn under your own name.
Yeah, and if you just did a Google search, John Baldoni piano, and you might even take them to my website, but probably or just John Baldoni LinkedIn piano.
Sure.
LinkedIn it's a great resource, but their search is not the best. So that's one. Yeah. So
well, and you heard it, Mindful Tribe, the website, johnbaldoni.com. Right. And
yes,
we want to make sure we get the spelling JOHNBALDONI, johnbaldoni.com. And you can check out his books on the website and all kinds of other things as well. And wow, it's really great to meet you and to talk to you and to know that, hey, you just live not that far from me, actually.
Nope, just over the border. And
right.
we were talking beforehand, Bruce, I've spent a lot of time in your great country and enjoy it and enjoy it. I've always enjoyed it immensely. So
that's
honored to be on your show, Bruce.
Thank you so much, John. And before we wrap it up, any final words of advice, any final tips for our Mindful Tribe listeners before we leave?
It's going to be a cliche, but I'm going to say it. Look for the good in others. Now, how many thousand times have you heard that? But, so I think in our contentious times, we look for flaws. Try to look for virtues. And that's also a note to self, too, Bruce. So I'll share that with others. Look for the good in others. So
fantastic. Well, thanks again for being on the show and all the very best to you, John.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye now. Okay.